You know what's funny? When it was prophesized the world would end in 2012, very few people took that threat seriously. Based on the quality of some of the video games released in that year though, it seems like there was indeed some catastrophic and hugely destructive natural disasters that changed the world as we know it. It may not have wiped out humanity, but it certainly decimated the good taste of those working in the games industry. Sure, there were some half-decent games released in 2012, Persona 4 Golden, Borderlands 2 and Mass Effect 3 to name but a few, but by golly was there some plops as well. For today's worst games of list, we're casting our minds back to the year 2012 in order to look at the games that made us wish the Mayans had been correct. As ever, a game must have received a minimum of 7 reviews in order to qualify. And where scores differ between game rankings and Metacritic, we've gone with the lower. I'm Ashton from TripleJump, and here are the 10 worst games of 2012. Number 10, Smash and Survive, PS3, 31%. Over the years, there have been a plethora of games that have combined vehicles and combat, and though some have been quite entertaining, others have been a downright flop. One such failure is Smash and Survive, a game that's basically Top Gear meets Robot Wars, if neither of those shows were any good. Players step into the shoes of a street racer who joins the Necromancers, a gang locked in a vicious turf war with a rival clan, the Hooligans. The first problem was the game's length, as the campaign only took players around 3 hours to complete. Admittedly, no one wanted to play Smash and Survive for long anyway, but that's besides the point. There was some variety in the game mode, so players did get to do more than just ramming their cars into other cars, but just because you've got something besides King of the Hill, it doesn't make you king of the video games. Additionally, neither the driving nor the combat controlled well, so players spent most of their time circling their opponents whilst trying desperately to land a hit. The game did look alright, but nice visuals weren't enough to mask its horrible personality. Smash and Survive? More like crash and burn. High five! Number 9, ESPN Sports Connection, Wii U, 29.29%. Oh yeah, here we go. It's sports time. Get it? Because ESPN Sports Connection is a Wii U game. It's fine, it's a bit of a thinker. The game consisted of 6 sports mini-games, namely football, American football, golf, tennis, baseball and karting. And if you're thinking that sounds an awful lot like a 2006 title that rhymes with Shmee Schmorts, then you'd be correct. The main thing that hampered the success of ESPN Sports Connection was the fact that everything it tried to do had been done better elsewhere. First of all, let's talk about the controls. Like many titles on the Wii U, ESPN Sports Connection suffered at the hands of its motion controls. Unfortunately, games like Wii Sports had previously proven that motion controls could work well, so the clunkiness of ESPN Sports Connection was all the more apparent. It also did nothing to set itself apart from its competitors and failed to include some basic functions like a progression system and character customization. Beyond this, the game suffered from numerous technical problems, long load times and frame rate drops, leaving players with a frustrating experience from beginning to end. We can only assume that ESPN stands for Extra Stupid Pointless Nonsense. Number 8, Hoodwink, PC, 29%. Perhaps the worst thing about Hoodwink is that it's an interesting concept utilised on an absolutely pants game. A dystopian world in which people live under the oppression of a psychotic pharmaceutical company sounds like it could be exciting to explore, and yet Hoodwink took this setting and somehow managed to turn it into a dull game. It's really quite an impressive feat when you think about it. Hoodwink was a title of a point-and-click persuasion, though if you think that means it doesn't have any kind of control problems, you'd be sadly mistaken. Moving the protagonist was an uphill battle, and players found that they had to click around the screen at random to get him to do what they wanted him to. We can forgive clunky controls if the puzzles are good, but sadly, the vast majority of Hoodwink's brain teasers boil down to finding an item and then placing it in the very obvious item goes here spot. To add further insult to injury, Hoodwink was embarrassingly short, taking most players just an hour to complete. That wouldn't have been a problem had it been a reasonably priced hour of solid fun, but most players found that they have more fun spending 60 minutes watching paint dry. Number 7, Orion Dino Beatdown, PC, 28.33%. It's not uncommon for a game to be known by different names, and often a game's title will change to aid with localization. Orion Dino Beatdown, however, changed its name so many times we're starting to think it might be in witness protection. The game was originally a mod for Half-Life 2 known as Orion Source, but in 2010, developer David Prassel announced his intent to release it as a full game to be called Orion Prelude. When it eventually launched in 2012, it was called Orion Dino Beatdown, but subsequent updates saw that change to Orion Dino Horde and later revert back to Orion Prelude. Everyone with me so far? No? I'm not surprised. Shooting waves of dinosaurs with your friends certainly sounds fun, but sadly, Orion Dino Beatdown just didn't do its premise justice. The game was filled to the brim with bugs, and not the sort you probably expect to find in prehistoric times. It suffered from horrendous lag and frame rate issues, and the whole thing was horribly unbalanced. Both the Horde and Prelude updates did take some steps to rectifying the game's problems, but ultimately the only real way to improve Orion Dino Beatdown would have been launching a large meteor at it. Number 6, Thundercats, DS, 28%. If you grew up in the 1980s, you probably have quite fond memories of Thundercats. For those who aren't familiar, Thundercats was an animated series that focused on the heroic exploits of a group of humanoid cats. It was revived on Cartoon Network in 2011 and was pretty well received by both newcomers and fans of the original. Sadly, the same cannot be said for Thundercats for the DS. The game was a simple platformer with beat-em-up combat, and when we say simple, oh boy do we mean it. Most of the game consisted of similar looking stages and almost identical enemies, but although hardly any of the enemies took any skill to defeat, the fights took absolutely ages. As if that weren't annoying enough, the controls, what few there were unresponsive, so there was usually some delay between telling protagonist Lion-O to swing his sword and him actually doing it. Visually, Thundercats wasn't the worst, though the animations were a little janky looking and weren't a patch on the TV show. Plus, the audio was some of the most irritating we've ever heard. We're not sure who gave the green light to unleash this abomination on the world, but they definitely deserve a swift whack upon the nose with a newspaper. Number 5, Frey, PC, 27%. We've seen an awful lot of glitchy and buggy games over the years, but few have been as bad as the absolute shambles that was Frey. Set in the year 2098, Frey sees players aligning themselves with one of 3 corporations, each of which has their own special abilities, and then fighting for prestige. The gameplay was strategy-based, so players put together a squad, ensured they were well equipped, and then unleashed them upon their rivals. There were 3 different classes of troops, and the idea was to balance your squad so they didn't get mashed by your opponents. The whole premise sounds great in theory, but Frey suffered from so many technical issues that it was basically unplayable. Just getting the game to load was an ordeal, as it would often crash before they even made it to the main menu. If they did manage to boot the game successfully, players found that matchmaking was almost impossible, as Frey was so broken that no one bothered playing it, and even if you could find someone else to play with, the game would usually fall over anyway. If a little more care had been taken before releasing Frey, it could have been a half-decent game. Instead, it just ended up being an utterly forgettable mess. Number 4, Amy, Xbox 360, 25%. The survival horror genre is full to the brim with Resident Evil and Silent Hill clones, so it's somewhat refreshing to come across a game like Amy that has its own unique mechanics. Said mechanics don't work very well, and the game as a whole is completely plops, but, you know, at least they tried. The game follows the titular Amy as she's escorted out of a zombie-infested city by player character Lana. What makes Amy special is that she is immune to the infection and is able to heal Lana should she be exposed to it. If Lana strays too far from Amy, she'll succumb to the plague. However, being infected allows her to pass by some enemies undetected. So it's a bit of a damned if you do and damned if you don't kind of scenario. As interesting as the premise and core gameplay mechanic were, Amy suffered from all of the symptoms of a bad game. The controls were clunky, the game was riddled with bugs, and Lana's inability to move more than a few feet from Amy without getting the lurgy added an unwanted time sensitivity to proceedings. I suppose, in the game's defense, playing Amy was better than actually getting the plague, even if it was only by a narrow margin. Number 3, Game Party Champions, Wii U, 24%. Oi, I warned you the last time that your kind isn't welcome in here, and I see you haven't changed one bit. Go on, get out. James, fetch me the broom. Indeed, the Game Party series may well have upgraded to a shiny blue Wii U box in 2012, but its contents remained much the same as its shoddy predecessor. Game Party Champions was a launch title for the Wii U, though I think it's fair to say that it didn't do much to endear players to the console. Like the game parties that came before, Game Party Champions consisted of a bunch of mini-games that were little to no fun to play. They included the likes of ping pong, mini golf and air hockey, and were insultingly easy, completely broken, or both. Somewhat strangely, Game Party Champions came with a story mode, which was your standard sort of fare. You play your way through several minigames in different areas, each of which has its own boss, all to help you get over the death of your father. Oh boy, that got dark really fast. On the plus side, it seems that the developers finally got the message regarding how much the world hated Game Party, as we haven't been subjected to another one since. Number 2, Infestation Survivor Stories. PC, 18.89%. By 2012, the zombie market had become a bit oversaturated. This wasn't necessarily a bad thing, not if you're into such things at least, but what it did mean was that any new kids on the block had to prove themselves worthy, and thanks to the likes of the Left 4 Dead and Resident Evil series, the bar was incredibly high. Infestation Survivor Stories, or the War Z if you want to get pre-trademark issues about this, stumbled up to the bar, tripped over, and face-planted the floor. On paper, Infestation Survivor Stories sounded promising. Players were plopped into a sandbox world and given the freedom to survive the zombie apocalypse in whatever way they saw fit. Part of the problem was the PvP, as although the idea was to team up with others, many players just went around shooting others and nicking all of their stuff. What was worse was that after being killed, you had to wait a whole hour before the game let you spawn back in, which is, quite frankly, ridiculous. Throw into the mix the fact that Infestation Survivor Stories was riddled with bugs, falsely advertised features that didn't exist, and topped it all off with microtransactions, and you've got one apocalyptic disaster of a game. And number 1, Family Party, 30 Great Games Obstacle Arcade, Wii U, 11%. I'd like you all to stop what you're doing, because this entry is nothing short of monumental. It is a privilege, nay, an honour, to present you a game that isn't just the worst game of 2012. It isn't even the worst game released for the Wii U. Family Party, 30 Great Games Obstacle Arcade, is in fact, according to our good friends at Metacritic, the absolute worst game of all time. Thankfully, Family Party 30 Great Games Obstacle Arcade, which isn't in any way an overly wordy, ridiculous title, was only ever released on the Wii U, and since very few people actually owned a Wii U, hardly anyone ended up subjecting themselves to it. Like many other titles that claimed to be party-friendly, Family Party 69 Terrible Titles 420 Blaze It was a collection of minigames that were each about as fun as a visit to your proctologist. It would have been bad enough had it simply been uninspired, but the controls were horrible, as were so many that employed the Wiimote. The graphics were naff, and the sound design made players want to inject cork into their ear canals. So, congratulations Family Party 30 Great Games Obstacle Arcade. May you forever serve as a reminder of what rock bottom truly looks like.